You know, when we think of reconnaissance, we might be picturing someone hiding in the bushes with a pair of binoculars, right? Just watching. Well, for the German army in World War II, it was a totally different game. For them, it was an aggressive, full contact sport. So, how did that aggressive thinking shape their machines and their tactics? Let's dive in. And this quote, it pretty much sums up their entire philosophy. Recon wasn't about just finding the enemy. Nope, it was about provoking them, about forcing them out into the open to show their hand. This aggressive mindset is what kicked off an incredible, rapid evolution in their scout vehicles all through the war. Okay, so let's dig into that. What did this fighting for information doctrine actually look like on the ground? First off, a little housekeeping with these German terms we're going to see. Don't worry, they're not as complicated as they look. The Aufklärungsabteilung, that's the recon unit we're talking about. And Sonderkraftfahrzeug, or Sd.Kfz for short, was basically just the official designation for any military vehicle, from an armored car to a half-track. Yeah, this was a whole different ballgame. We're not talking about sitting back and reporting. It was a proactive, four-step process. They'd find the enemy, and then, and this is the crazy part, they basically fake a huge attack. The whole point was to bait the other commander, to trick him into revealing everything, where his tanks were, where his anti-tank guns were hiding, and then get on the radio and call all that juicy intel back to headquarters. All right, so if that's your game plan, what kind of tools do you need in your toolkit? Well, at the start of the war, their vehicles were perfectly suited for the blitzkrieg in Western Europe, where you had plenty of nice paved roads. The early gear was all about one thing: speed. You had motorcycles for that initial peak, and armored cars like the Sd.Kfz 222 that could tear down a road at 80 kilometers an hour. I mean, they were incredibly effective in a place like France, just zipping ahead of the main tank force. But that reliance on wheels and good roads, well, that was its Achilles heel. A fatal flaw they hadn't seen coming.
And that hidden flaw? It wasn't hidden for long. 1941, the invasion of the Soviet Union. The Eastern Front became this brutal crucible that just completely shattered their early recon doctrine and all their equipment. Everything changed.
So put yourself in their shoes for a second. What do you do when the roads just vanish into mud? And worse, when you finally find the enemy, their tanks are way, way bigger and tougher than yours. This was the life or death crisis facing German recon units. It hit them in two ways. First, mobility just failed. The few roads that existed turned into a sea of mud, then got buried in snow. Their wheeled armored cars and motorcycles were just stuck, useless. Second, a firepower failure. The Red Army rolled out the T-34 and KV tanks, and honestly, their little 20mm cannons might as well have been pea shooters against that kind of armor. So they couldn't move and they couldn't fight. It was simple: adapt or get wiped out. Okay, so your whole playbook is useless. What now? Well, this is where the German engineers got really clever, focusing like a laser on those two massive problems: mobility and firepower. And their first solution was just brilliantly pragmatic. They literally took the gun turret off the Sd.Kfz 222, the armored car that was stuck in the mud, and just slapped it onto the chassis of an Sd.Kfz 250 half-track, which could go just about anywhere. This new vehicle, the 259, pretty much solved the mobility crisis overnight. Simple, genius. And this change happened at lightning speed. By 1942, these half-tracks were replacing wheeled vehicles all over the place. And by 43, now that they could actually move again, the focus shifted to firepower. Everything started getting up guns with bigger and better cannons. This brutal cycle of problem and solution, all driven by the harsh realities of the Eastern Front, eventually led to what many experts still call the finest armored car of the entire war. And here it is, the Sd.Kfz 234 series. This 8-wheeled beast was the final product of all those hard-learned lessons. And just look at this number: 1,000 kilometers. Think about that. That's an absolutely insane operational range. This wasn't just a scout car anymore. It was a true, long-range, deep-penetration weapon. Technologically, this thing was a marvel. 8-wheel drive and 8-wheel steering meant it could practically dance its way through rough terrain. It had a big air-cooled engine, which was perfect for the extreme hot and cold of the Russian climate. And get this, it had a second, rear-facing driver. So if the crew ran into trouble, they didn't have to waste time turning around. They could just floor it in reverse at full speed. How cool is that? But the real killer feature was its versatility. That same advanced chassis became the platform for a whole family of vehicles. It started with a basic 20mm cannon. Then came the famous Puma, with a high-velocity 50mm gun that gave it a serious anti-armor punch.
Then they put a short 75mm on it for infantry support. And for the grand finale, they mounted a full-blown 75mm PaK-40 anti-tank gun on it. Your scout car had officially become a tank destroyer.
So what's the big takeaway here? What was the lasting impact of this super aggressive combined arms approach to reconnaissance?
Well, here's the kicker. This whole idea of fighting for information, it didn't just disappear in 1945. It actually created a whole new model for reconnaissance that's still with us today. This concept of a fast, mobile, heavily armed scouting force that could fight for itself, well, that became the blueprint for modern units like the U.S. Army's armored cavalry regiments. At the end of the day, the story of German armored recon proves one thing for sure. Necessity is absolutely the mother of invention. The brutal lessons of Russia forced an evolution that produced some of the most advanced vehicles of the war. But it also leaves us with this really tricky question, a tension that still exists on the battlefield today. What is the cost of asking your scouts, the eyes and ears of your army, to also be its frontline fighters?